Chelsea St. Pierre for the Suburban newspaper. If you've seen our recent article on the major win for the first time in 2 decades for demerged cities, as the provincial government has been called and has listened and is now ready to step in to create a fair environment and platform at the agglomeration for demerged cities. Over the years, we've seen countless disputes. The Suburban has reported to our viewers what has been going on a regular basis as this develops, step by step, with every decision made by the agglomeration with absolutely no consultation to demerged cities, how that affects residents, how that affects businesses, how that affects development, urban planning, and so on and so forth. West Island mayors say this is the first time that they've seen any sort of light at the end of this tunnel that they've been working on pushing through to have their message heard. DDO Mayor Alex Batauchi is meeting with us today. In this exclusive interview, he will explain what led here, how we got here, and what it means to be here.
Yeah. Let me begin from the beginning. You've got the CMM, la Communauté Métropolitaine de Montréal. Monsieur Legault has decided to put his nose into the business of the CMM because, as he has cited, he sees that there's a lack of democracy. Montreal has the majority, and rightfully so, because the population sizes. The CMM represents Montreal and some other 80 cities that are in the greater area of Montreal. Because of this lack of democracy, he wants to weight it differently. He wants to move to a different weighting system.
How is this brought to his attention?
It is the cities outside of Montreal that brought it to his attention, that Montreal essentially, everything that they want, they ram down everybody's throat at the CMM. So because of this lack of democracy, what Monsieur Legault has brought up, he'd like to weight it differently. He'd like to weight it by voter population and not by population, by actual voters. We're not getting into whether that's right or wrong, because there's many ways that you can create a new governance model. You could do population, finances, voter population. You could do many things. What we did as demerged cities, this is our role now, what we came in to basically affect is, we realized that this lack of democracy at the CMM is the same type of thing that we have been experiencing at the agglomeration with Montreal, where they have the majority. So for example, we are 13% of the population at the agglomeration, and yet we're paying 18% of the total bill, just to give you a scale of what's happening. Everything that they want, they simply ram through. So for example, when they borrowed $20 million a few months ago, and we questioned them, and we said, you're borrowing this money, but what's it for? It's to do a project at the Hippodrome. Okay, fine. But how do you account for these $20 million? We can only account for 3.5 million out of the 20. When you start to hear certain arguments and there's no accountability, and they're doing what they want, when they want, and how they want, clearly there's a lack of democracy. So last week, or the week before, I should say, a few months ago, we wrote a memorandum that went to Quebec City, and it was accepted by the minister responsible for municipal affairs. So she invited us up for the deliberations and for us to go and plead our case. Now, while the piece of legislation was for the CMM specifically on Bill 104, it was an omnibus bill that is more wide scoped, and you could bring in other elements of things that could be going wrong with municipalities. All right. So we took this opportunity, and for the first time, I would say in 20 years, we were heard loud and clear by the minister responsible, by Madame Guibault, and I have to throw flowers to her. I think she did a fantastic job. She questioned us thoroughly on our material and what we were presenting. And what it really came down to is to reformulate the governance of the way we function at the agglomeration.
So can you give some details on what it is that you're asking? What are the demands that you have?
Okay. So it's clear that by the time that we get to the agglomeration, we've become rubber stampers. Okay, when we sit in those chambers, we've got no power. Everything that's been decided has been decided, and we've got no power. We are asking for a creation of a committee prior to these meetings, whereby we will be able to sit down with the party that's at power and be able to collaborate with them. We want the success of Montreal, but we want our own success as well in this equation. It's very simple for us. That's our first request. Our second is to sit on the actual executive of Montreal, where some of these files are discussed months before decisions are even taken, where they begin to think of something, to create something. It would be good for us to be at that table. When I say us, it doesn't have to be several members. It could just be one or two elected officials from our side representing, to make sure that the conversations that we have, that they're taking into consideration our concerns. Okay? Those are the two major ones. Okay? And the last request is, we always get our documentation close to when we have to take a vote, or even after we've already taken a vote. So go and imagine, you're voting on something and you only get the information afterwards. We need to get that governance cleaned up, because that can no longer continue to exist. In today's day and age, 2025, before you take a vote, you have to have the information before you take the vote.
What was most interesting to Madame Guibault in your presentations?
Excellent question. Two pieces of fact. The fact that we represent 250,000 people, and 250,000 people's voices are being silenced. I think that got to her. There was also a moment, she asked a question, but I don't understand. You're at the agglomeration. How is it that at the agglomeration you don't have a voice? Obviously you can stand up and you can speak. And we explained to her that by the time that the information gets to the agglomeration, it's done. C'est fait accompli. The decisions have already been made at the council meeting of Montreal. And that's when she realized, and you could see the expression on her face, she realized that essentially you're meeting, but you're rubber stamping, and there's really no value in the meeting.
But everything that's been lost over the last 2 decades, is there any recourse for that? I know that George Burrell from Beaconsfield did initiate some recourse, to the best of his ability. Are you looking towards anything like that for the future?
Step one, you're speaking about the financial end of things. We're not even there. We're just simply speaking about receiving the services that we actually pay for. When you are 13% of the population and you're paying 18% of the bill, and you can speak to anybody in the West Island and say, do you have fantastic STM services in the West Island? I bet you most of West Islanders will tell you no on that. Do you have fantastic policing in the West Island? Most people will probably tell you, no, we could use a little bit more. Well, we're paying for it, but we're not necessarily receiving the services.
Yeah, so I'd like to circle back to last year when the CMM came out with the urban planning, and you had done public consultations in your city leading up to that point, though not intentionally for that point, because again, you were blindsided and had no idea that this was coming because there was absolutely no consultation. So just to compare this back to the Agglo, because, seeing as these are two different entities, but I mean, the CMM, this argument originally started there. Can you just explain sort of how that transitioned over to the Agglo in this case?
Yes. In fact, the people who sit at the CMM are the same people that are sitting as part of the administration of Montreal, meaning elected officials. So as they are, I'm going to call it guiding, I'm not going to use the word manipulating, but I'm going to say guiding the process at the CMM without necessarily with full disclosure. So we found out some stuff that was going on that was going to be imposed on us as West Island cities. Well, we found out what was going on, and that's where we began to voice our opinion, and then that's where everything started to unravel, and we got our changes made. But there could have been surprises when it comes to urban development. Densities, heavy densities to the West Island, which most cities in the West Island are okay when we look at development, but not necessarily the level of densities that Montreal would have wished upon the West Island.